Okay, so we're back, and I went ahead and I did finish doing some pretty major reroutes and redesigns in the background. So let's go ahead and pop over and look at those real fast. Basically, this is the board now. Some highlights of what I've done here. There's a copper fill on the back side that's tied to ground. This is to take care of a lot of extra ground traces. There's also a copper fill on the front, which is ground, as well as the traces that we showed earlier for connecting up this boost regulator. I did have to make a couple changes to how those grounds were instantiated. In one case, what I had to do was to make sure that the grounds were, the fills, excuse me, did not use thermals, so they filled all the way in order to get this nice solid pattern here. I did that on multiple ones of these. Other than that, I didn't move anything major. I did end up taking the battery connector, flipping it to the back side, the side that will have the buttons and the LED and the other big battery, because it's a fairly tall connector. Other than that, we're ready to do a design rule check on that. And so to do the design rule, we pop up here to the top and we perform our design rules. Okay, I've already pre-clicked list unconnected, and it's gone through and it's actually pointed out a few things that I haven't yet finished connecting. You can see that some of these unconnected pins here. So basically, if I double click on it, it tends to try to highlight it for me. So it's something related to the ground node, and it specifically did list a pin. I happen to have already looked this up, but really what it's complaining about is this right here. See this little white line? It's a little hard to see now that the copper fills have happened. So what I can do also is I can turn off the copper fills so I'm not seeing them, or I can leave them with just kind of an outline around where the copper is as well. But just turning them off is useful. And so right here, this ground node here, ground to ground, isn't actually connected to ground. And so it's complaining that there needs to be something here. To handle that, I'm just going to go ahead and pop in a via, right, and get my grid set properly so that I can actually place this. This particular one was done on 5 mils. I got to get it in the right spot. There we are. And, oh, need to add a trace, excuse me. Trace, there we go. And so I'm just going to make sure this via is outside of the lines that are shown here to not have intersections. That's it right there. Bang. Okay. And then I'm going to end that line right on top of that spot. And so now there's actually a connection to ground there that will allow for that path, that problem to be solved. That's not right on the trace. If I wanted to mess around a little more, I could get that actually dead in the middle of this trace rather than being slightly offset. It probably would be a good idea to do that, and I'll probably go around before I actually send this board to production, but I want to kind of show you the rest of these errors as we're moving through them. Okay, so let's run this design rule check again. We're going to list the unconnected now. There are no unconnected, so I've solved those. We're going to run a full DRC. Okay, it checked the ratness, it checked the clearances on everything is based upon these specs. Looks great, unconnected. If I wanted to, I could actually create a report, which would be useful for me to actually see each of the steps along the way. So V1, excuse me, dot report. Okay, and we can go look at that to get this information. It'll have dates and information so that we know what happened. That could be good for verification for others that yes, I truly did run DRC. So at this point, this thing is ready for production, and it could be sent out for fabrication right now. There are some things that DRC doesn't check that I haven't done yet, and we're going to go to fast forward mode while I fix this, and that's these reference designators, because they're everywhere, and some of them are easy to see, some of them are hard to see, some of them are huge, some of them are small, some of them are almost off the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the time to actually tweak and adjust all of these. We're going to shrink them all by a little bit because they don't need to be as large as they are to be visible. And then we're going to make sure that they're all rotated such that either they're read upright on this screen, or if they're read in this direction, not all four possible directions. So it'd be like C8 going up the side would be okay. Another example of that would be C6 is how I would expect to see it. D2 is correct. I don't seem to have any actually that are wrong, but if there were any, I would fix those to all line up like this one is or like this one is. So we're going to do that now. Okay, so I added a bunch of silkscreen elements that'll make it easier to use. So I added pin numbers where available. I wasn't able to put all the pin numbers in these really dense areas, so instead I went ahead and just labeled the ends at least, so you'd have some indication of what was there. Earlier I put I labeled the buttons with reset, PB0 and PB1 for the light, so that we'd be aware of what those were connected to. Then I also added in copper some information about the board. It's kind of a standard to put in copper rather than in silkscreen when it's things that are important to never lose sight of. This would allow someone, if they got this board in the future, in theory, to track me down and ask me questions about it. And it would also tell me what version of the board this is in the future. And since it's not in the silkscreen, it's not really very losable, if that makes any sense. So at this point, these things are pretty much ready to go. We should do a final DRC just to make sure that everything's been in place. So I'll run a standard DRC. It's going to put it in that report. So we'll save that out. It didn't seem to have any problems here. And then we can list the unconnecteds. All right, I put it in the report also. And there are no unconnected pins. So at this point, we're good to go. The markers are indications of where the problem is. So I can get rid of those because there weren't any. But basically, this board is pretty well done. There's probably some flaws in there. I will spend a little time on a design review off camera just to make sure before I send it off to production. But pretty much, I don't expect to find too many things that I'm going to change at this. The next step here is to actually edit the bill of materials and make sure that we do know which parts are going to be coming and that they're in stock and they're available to purchase before I click the board out, because nothing is more annoying and time consuming than planning on having a certain part, sending a board out on a 2-week term production, and then realizing that the part you wanted isn't available or is too expensive or something of that nature. So we want to make sure the bill of materials is right prior to actually sending it out. So we'll do that next.